Austin Tech Connect is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. Founded in 1992, ATC exists to help unite the local technology ecosystem and to encourage the spread of community, collaboration, and conversations in Central Texas. This podcast is sponsored by SailPoint. They are a leading provider of identity security for the modern enterprise, empowering organizations worldwide to put identity security at the core of their business. With a foundation of artificial intelligence and machine learning, SailPoint Identity Security delivers the right access to the right identities and resources at the right time. Now, here is this week's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Austin Tech Connect, the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. My name's Tom Singer, and I have been with ATC now for 2 years, and we're shaking things up and making changes and looking to the future. And with this podcast, every single week, we try to bring to you an interview, a discussion with somebody from the Austin community who has experience in the tech world and is shaking things up and making things happen. And today I'm kind of excited because we have an old friend of mine, someone I have known for 20 years here on the show, and that is Sam Decker. And for those of you who don't know Sam Decker, he has been in and around our Austin technology community for nearly 3 decades and has been an advisor, an investor, a founder. Gosh, he's done so much. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tom. Great to see you.
Great to see you and great to have you here. So let me tell you a little bit about Sam. Sam has built and started and advised companies, and some of them have had pretty nice exits that he's been involved with. He also now divides his time helping other companies grow. He has a lot of experience in the digital and social marketing world, but he actually has his fingers into a lot of places. He's always looking for what's out there that's on the edge. What's the next thing? And in fact, I can actually speak to this because way back, there was an organization called TechXchange, and I was on the board of that group, and Sam was just getting involved, and he was in the marketing department. He was a marketing director at Dell, and he wanted to get into the startup world. And he met with myself and some other people from the TechXchange and other groups, and he just asked a lot of questions. He said, what's the next thing? How does someone move from a big company? He was watching, he was looking, and the way I described it at the time was he was thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. And now looking back, that's exactly what Sam has done his whole career. He's always looked 2 or 3 steps ahead. He then went on to start his own company, Mass Relevance, which ended up merging with Spreadfast. And to this day, Sam is always doing kind of interesting things. He even owns a company in the auto racing space. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Anyway, there's so many things about Sam that we could just keep talking about. He's the father of 5. He's married to the #1 audio engineer in all of Austin. And actually, she's stepping in to be the chairman of the Long Center. She is a force of nature. And Sam is just a good guy. So Sam, let's jump in. Let's talk about your career. I talked about you starting off at Dell, being in marketing at Dell, and then looking for how do I get into this startup world? Let's go back in the Wayback Machine to then. And how did you get started moving from a big company into startups?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to go even back further. So I came out of college. I had a Mac SE when I was a senior in high school. I loved the Mac. It changed my life. And I wanted to work for Apple. And I got a job at Apple coming out of college. And within 6 months of joining Apple, we spun that off into a startup. So then the first third of my career is in startups. And I wrote my first book on word of mouth marketing back then. And I sat down with Guy Kawasaki, who was an evangelist at Apple and written many books. And I was thinking I was trying to figure out the path of my career back then. And I would have been like 24, 25. And he said, I'll never forget this. So you could be sweeping the floor at Toys R Us and I wouldn't worry about you. And it was like this first moment that I'm like, I don't have to figure everything out. And I might be thinking about it, but I don't have to. So long story short, if I step back, of course, I continue to try to control everything. And I think we as humans love control. And as business people, we want to control. But as I look back, I was in several startups in Silicon Valley, and all of them were 10 years ahead. Big lesson learned is a lot of startups are ahead of their time, and you have to observe timing more than anything. And so after all that, Dell called in 99 and brought me to Austin. And I'm so glad they did. And I ran Dell.com, among other things. I ran marketing for a division. kind of going B2C to B2B, and was there for about 6 years. And through that time, I knew I got to a place where it was like, I don't like politics. I want to like get my hands dirty. I like to build things and create things. And I think I need to get back into startups, and I didn't know where to start. And that is somehow I stumbled into TechChange. And Tom, you were part of the community there that embraced me. I made it to the board, invited speakers. I think brought in Gary
Vaynerchuk.
Yeah.
I remember when we had Gary Vaynerchuk come and speak. He was not yet famous.
Yes. We brought in Jeffrey Moore, who was famous. It was a great experience. And through that, especially learning from you, the networking, like meeting someone and saying, who are three other people I could meet? And so I was in full-time at Dell, but I was having 3 coffees or lunches a week.
Yep.
And just rotating that. And eventually, Jeff Browning at Austin Ventures got to know me and trust me and introduced me to a couple companies. I had a swing at leading marketing at HomeAway, and then ended up meeting Brett, where word of mouth meets e-commerce. I'm like, I've written 2 books on word of mouth, and I was been in e-commerce. This sounds like a bullseye for me. And so that's got me out of Dell in 2005 when we launched Bazaarvoice.
So, it's interesting because I've known you said you got here in 99. So I've known you almost 25 years, I guess. And what's interesting is I didn't know about your background with Apple and startups. I just always thought of you as Dell, which is actually a great reminder to all of us that we don't know, even people we call our friends, we don't know their whole story unless we've asked the questions and we've listened. So, you came here in 99. And, I think that means you've seen a lot of the changes, because that's really when the boom days sort of began. Before we jump into sort of that next phase, that startup phase, did you have any idea Austin would become what it is today?
No, I guess there was this belief when I came into Dell. When I came into Dell, it was a safe place, a safe landing place. Who knew what the ecosystem was at that point? I wasn't thinking about that. I just knew that I've been in startups. None of them made me any money. Let's make money the slow way. Come into Dell, learn some things I've never, I don't really get the checkbox credit of Apple. And so maybe I need some credibility, because I don't like to go back to school. I'm not, I don't want to get my MBA. So maybe I need a name like Dell on my resume. That was really the objective. And then let's see where Austin ends up, because maybe we'll have to move again. But I had no idea of what the tech community was in Austin. I'd visited a couple times. I knew it had a big government aspect, and it had a few big companies. Fast forward, when I jumped out of Dell, it was still, I'm going back to startups, and I had this pain of startups not working, and I really validated this Bazaarvoice thing before I signed on the dotted line. But
but that worked out. That one worked out really well, I think.
It worked out. I mean, it was like HomeAway could have worked out too. But yeah, Bazaarvoice was a perfect fit for me and sort of where my head was. And I think, but it could have just been, I had been recruited at Garden.com in 98. Like that was my first swing at possibly coming here with Cliff Sharples. And it was like, we'll give you $500 to move. I'm like, I've got a family. That's not enough I've been through startups. There's another startup. It's a big risk now. And then Dell called. And so that made the move easy and safe. It's interesting. You say entrepreneurs go towards risk. Entrepreneurs should go towards reducing risk. And so I went into that knowing that I would get some credibility with Dell and so forth. But ultimately, I had a longer run at Dell than I thought, and came out the other end into a startup. And my thesis then was, if it doesn't work out, I can always go back to a big company because I got Dell. Because I don't know that there are a bunch of startups like Silicon Valley to jump from, And so at the time, there still was not the ecosystem that exists. And I believe an ecosystem has to have large, medium, and small companies. Yep. There is a portion of talent that traverses between those that keeps things alive. And there's people that jump out of those to start companies and keep that whole thing rolling. And I didn't think there were a few big companies, and the startup scene wasn't active when I started at Bazaarvoice. So fast forward a little more at Bazaarvoice, and I feel like my time is coming to an end. I've sort of built 7 products, built the marketing, built the brand, built all these things, and now it's getting into fine-tuning mode. And given my experience at Dell, I knew that I could do it, but it wasn't my sweet spot. I like building and creating. And so I started stirring the pot again like I did at TechChange. And eventually I stirred the pot with Brian Manel and Josh, and Y Combinator had started already years, and we had nothing like that in Austin. And we also didn't have a lot of consumer startups, and we didn't have a lot of people coming to Austin to start companies. So the whole thesis of Capital Factory back in 2009 was, let's try to attract the talent that is going to start some consumer digital companies in Austin.
And that's one thing I don't think I said in your introduction, that along with Brian Manel and Josh, you were one of the co-founders of Capital Factory.
Yeah. And it was very much like Y Combinator, take 10 companies in, like look at 100 companies, choose 10, shepherd them, mentor them for a summer, have a demo day. Hopefully they get funding, and hopefully they're off to the races. That was it. That was all the Capital Factory's value prop at the time. And so through that, I learned a lot about, just the stage of startups then, of Austin's ecosystem, of people. And the big learning coming from Silicon Valley is that this community is so willing to help. There is so much interest in mentorship and helping companies. And so when we talk fast forward and say, oh, it's built this big startup ecosystem, it was in the DNA, I think, of the city and people here to be that helpful, as opposed to Silicon Valley, which was really more of echo chamber. You're more looking at the startup to your left and right and seeing what they're doing than getting active help in that community, in my opinion.
So I want to jump in. I want to jump in with a question. Do you think Austin still has that in our DNA as much as we did, of that willingness of people to wanting to jump in, of the community wanting to come together and celebrate the successes, whether it's a small, a medium, or a large company?
Well, I just think that it has so many things going for it now, and the full ecosystem is there. And we've gone from one big VC to many. And we got people coming in from Austin that don't know people. And so if I were to give it one word, I'd say it's diversity now. Can you find the pockets and the people that want to help and available? Yeah, you can. Yeah, absolutely. If you pick 10 people to help you, the motivations might be more varied than they were back then, which is maybe more, what's the word I'm looking for, but just more interested in helping because it's exciting to have, a startup.
Maybe a little more altruistic back then.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe it was more of like, yeah, we want startups to grow and we want to be part of that scene. We want it to grow. It was more like we were interested in the movement of the startup community in Austin, and therefore we'll be involved in startups. And now there's plenty of startups to pick your choice, make a choice. And why would you get involved, and what point, and for what reasons, and what's your motivation? So I think that's more varied, but there's still people now that would get excited about startups in a certain space, or the certain kind of people and backgrounds, or because they want to invest and be involved, et cetera.
So let's move on to you then jumping and starting Mass Relevance. What was that about? How did that happen for you? And what was the trajectory of that company?
So when I knew I was leaving Bazaar Voice, I started stirring the pot, much as I did back at Dell, and meeting. I had some ideas. I knew there were people out there with ideas, given the Capital Factory, and so I was sort of like doing what I did at the end of Dell. It's just having a lot of coffees and meetings and seeing what's going on and what's interesting. And along that path, I met Brian and Eric, who had started this app called Tweet River at the time. And basically, it was an app to filter tweets in real time. And sort of the supposition there at the time was sort of a $25 a month, like SMB or consumer app thing. At the same time, we were talking, looking at it, Twitter was like, hey, we like your app. And so certain things, this is where you can't really, you never know when lightning strikes, is like Twitter got involved, I got involved, Twitter was growing, et cetera. So in that sort of 3-4 month time that we were talking, a lot of things came to bear. And I had this thesis that, okay, I just come from user-generated content, mostly reviews, But there's all this content out there that people are creating on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram that is not being used out there in the world. And so this platform could be a brand enterprise SaaS platform to curate all this social content into their websites, into events, into all these things. At the same time, Twitter's like, we want tweets on TV. We want a piece of that TV advertising revenue. And we think you can help us get there. So long story short, it's like, okay, I've got two hypotheses. One I'm pretty convinced about. One, we'll see. I don't know anything about entertainment. And a potential partnership with Twitter, I think I can go get funding on that. And so that's when I went out, met with AB, met with a bunch of others, met with Maples. Maples, I just wrote an article on LinkedIn about that, about how Maples really made Mass Relevance. I mean, he's like, I'll sign on the dotted line right now. And he was our first board member. And then AB said, yeah, I want to join too. Long story short, we got funding. It took months and 20 visits to San Francisco, 1,200 emails to sign a contract with Twitter. This contract, I would give the term over the barrel, is how I felt, is like we needed them more than they needed us kind of thing, but they did need us. So we signed an exclusive contract to curate social content. I went to Mike Maples and I said, look, this is not the contract I want. I can give most of your money back. What do you say? And he's like, no, take the red pill. I'm in it with you. Let's do it. Let's go. And that gave me a lot of confidence. I said, okay, let's see what happens, And so we went forward in entertainment. Within a year, I became an expert in social TV, which was a term that, Twitter was on the cover of Fast Company talking about it, and it became a movement. So when you talk about these winds of change, we rode that wind of, social on TV, and we got every broadcaster, most leagues, most teams within 3 years. And then I went off and also did brands. We got 100 brands signed up. And at the end of the day, we were 150 people in 3.5 years. And we merged with Spreadfast to make a bigger company in the social space, which is really what you have to do because there's so many at that point. We talk about startups. By that time, it's too easy to start a startup, too easy to get on Amazon Web Service and code something. So really to get momentum, you got to figure out a way to get big.
So let's jump forward to today. So now you're involved with a lot of different things as an advisor, as an investor, as a board member. So I guess my first question is, how do you even know where to put your time when you're involved with so many things? You don't have the day-to-day of running a fast-growing tech company, directly in your lap on the daily basis. But now you have a lot of things that you're doing and a lot of people who you're helping. So how do you even know where to start every day?
So I had a great boss at Dell once tell me when he's thinking about the next job or company or whatever, he looks at three things. Am I learning? Am I challenged? Am I having fun? In each of those things, there's aspects that I look at. What I've learned is it is not fulfilling. I'm an operator. I'm a builder. I'm a creator. It is not fulfilling just to be an advisor, just to be a board member, just to be an investor. You'd have these meetings where you think you blew their mind and changed the direction of the startup. You come back a quarter later and nothing has changed. And so I think as operators, we like the input output. Like there's a dopamine or adrenaline of like, I put something in, I see something out, and I improve and change and fix. And maybe that's why I like marketing. And so when I look at things that I can add some value and have that back and forth and get involved, know the market, know the product, know the people, enjoy the journey. At the end of the day, these companies I've exited are gone. The brands are gone. But the best thing I got out of it was the experience and that top 10% of people you want to work with again. And so now I shape things as I look at it. Am I learning? Am I challenged? Am I having fun? Can I add value in a way that is fulfilling to me? Am I going to enjoy the people that I'm going to be working with? And am I learning a space, a market, a product, something that I want to lean into? When I started FairWorlds, after I sold Mass Relevance, I had started an agency with a friend called Clearhead, A/B split testing. We eventually exited to Accenture. And I learned the agency model. I'm like, I don't know anything about 7-8 years ago. I don't know anything about AI or blockchain, but immersive reality, VR, augmented reality, 3D, that is like websites. And I knew websites. And so started an agency called FairWorlds to sort of get paid to learn in the immersive space, And so I liked my co-founder. It was like I met him years ago and I wanted to do something with him. He was starting to get into VR. He had the creative and technical chops. And I said, let's build this business together. And we have. And I've enjoyed learning about the space. I've enjoyed learning about clients' different issues and needs, and become friends with a lot of clients and our team and enjoyed the journey. And so that is a side of my dice. It's not full-time CEO running the thing. My partner does. But I'm in it enough every week that I am learning, I am being challenged, I am having fun, I am enjoying the people. And so that's what I look for.
And you get to fulfill that, hey, I'm building something piece.
Yeah, exactly. I'm building something, and be part of that. And in a space that is growing and changing and not growing as fast or as I thought. But I mean, that's the risk, that's the bet you make when you start a company is like, can I execute well? Is in a space that's going to grow? Does it have a wind in its sails that I can, sort of put up the sail and sail well? Both things have to happen.
So, Sam, you talked about the fact that back when you were 24, you went and met with a bunch of people, Guy Kawasaki being one, saying, how do I build my career? Where do I go next? When you were at Dell, you reached into the startup and tech community and said, hey, what's out there? Who are the 3 people I should know? What should I do? When you were looking to go from Bazaar Voice to starting your own startup, you did the same thing. So what advice do you have for somebody, whether they're just a pure startup entrepreneur, or maybe they're more seasoned in their career, but they know there's a next? What advice do you have for them about how do they peel back that onion to find ideas and people and funding and everything else? What advice do you have for that person who's in one of those positions that you've been in before, looking to make that shift?
All right, I'm going to share my operating system, which was developed with my partners at Clearhead. Long story short, we did A/B split testing on e-commerce websites. We'd have ideas, the client have ideas. Our ideas were not great. It wasn't until we understand the customer's problem and we prioritized that problem and came up with hypothesis against that problem that we would make any progress on real good tests. And we did the same with business problems. And so the model, it's changed names, but it sort of is called GPS, goals, problems, solutions. And the very simple but difficult to execute path of this is first identify your specific measurable goals, know what those top goals are, and then spend time on the problems that are preventing you from that goal and prioritize those problems. So the reason I say this is that most startups get involved in ideas, new product ideas. There's 100 ways to market, et cetera, et cetera. I had a startup last week, a CEO come to me and say, where should we invest in marketing? I'm like, holy cow, that's a can of worms. Where should I invest my networking time? Okay, here's a simple answer. Identify, if you know your market, you know your process, you know your kind of how your flywheel runs, identify the biggest problem preventing you from reaching the goal that you want to reach. Like know it with data, know it very intimately, and then target your networking, your marketing, whatever initiatives, hypothesis, solutions you have that are the highest likelihood to overcome that problem. Not just something you'd like to do, like here's an idea, I like to do this. And what happens, a lot of people go to what things they like to do or they know. It has no relationship to the top problems, and it has no business being there versus a hypothesis that would solve that problem better. And so you really have to have sort of a data-oriented approach that says, my biggest problem coming out of Dell was this. I have no credibility in Austin, the startup community. I don't know what is the best opportunities in the startup community. I don't know. I knew that I didn't want to have the same premature joining a company too early in the space. I didn't want the same experience. So I knew the problems I needed to solve. And the only way I was going to do it is kissing a lot of frogs. And sort of narrowing my path to the people most likely to succeed in the startup space in Austin. And so it took some time to get there to find people that had the right opportunity, the right market space, all of that.
I do remember when you and I first met and we talked about you wanting to make that transition into the more startup world. And I'm going to paraphrase it. I don't think this is an exact quote, but I remember asking you something to the effect of, what do you want to accomplish? Because you were a Dell guy. We didn't see a lot of Dell guys in the Austin tech scene actually showing up at things like TechChange or ETC or whatever. And I remember asking you, and your answer was, I want to be the CMO of the next hottest startup in Austin.
Wow.
And
I verbalized that.
I vividly remember that was what you wanted to achieve. And I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of cute. Like, how do you pick that? And then like 3 years later, you were the CMO of Bizarre Voice. And I always have told the story that, I don't know if people believe in manifesting, but that guy did it.
Yeah, that's interesting that I said that. Because I do remember over my career looking at jobs, online and saying, I need 7 years experience, all this, and those jobs, and I'd be envious of those that had those jobs at the companies that had the juice, And I always felt like from my startups that you never heard of to Dell, like I lost the first position at Dell to someone that had Coca-Cola and Deloitte on her resume. And she was a disaster. This division, Dell hired her, and then I got kicked to another division. So we both started at the same time. She was a disaster, but she had the juice of credibility. And I said, I don't have that credibility. So I want to have a top position at a top company to build my credibility, because I knew I wasn't going to get my MBA. I knew I was not into that. I wrote 2 books. I learned a lot through startups you've never heard of. But you do get reduced down to sound bites a lot of times in terms of opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. So for someone who's looking for an advisor, right? If someone is, they're trying to figure out, how do I find the right investors, the right advisors, the right coaches, et cetera? How do people even start?
I go back to the primary problem, because you can have, like, if I knew that business development and partnerships were key to the growth of my company, it's the biggest problem we need to solve, I'd find an advisor that excelled at that. If I knew that I need to get really, like Mass Relevance, we needed to get really good at sort of DevOps efficiency. We were processing the fire hose of Twitter in real nanoseconds and milliseconds, right? And Eric, our co-founder and CTO, had to get really good at DevOps. And so do we need an advisor or investor or something that really knows that? Or a relationship with Twitter is our biggest challenge. And so I got advisors that had relationships, sort of backdoors to executives at Twitter, because that was our biggest risk. So you kind of have to identify what the biggest problem is to solve, and find the kind of role or experience that you want. And then you find chemistry, because at the end of the day, chemistry and motivation. You got to find someone who's willing to spend the time. Why do they want to be an advisor, or mentor, or investor? And how are you going to use them? I've had advisors I've had to fire because, and ones that I've quit from because the expectation was not matched. And so, like, a third thing is sort of like, how are you going to operationalize what you get from that advisor or mentor? What do you really want? What does it look like over the year? Can you normalize it for both parties, and says it's going to be these introductions, 10 introductions. It's going to be a monthly meeting, and it's going to be ad hoc email or call when I have a pressing problem, probably no more than this many times a year. And so once you've articulated all that, then you're both on the same page. You both agreed to it. And hopefully it's someone you have chemistry with, and hopefully they have the experience, knowledge, data, evidence that you need, because all a startup is building confidence in a bunch of areas that you don't have confidence in, and you need data or evidence or experience to grow that confidence. It's when I look at startups, I say, what's the conviction and what's the evidence? Like think about all the elements of a startup that has to happen: the market, the solution, the distribution. Okay, I have a founder. What is your conviction on each of these items, and what is your evidence of that you need to show for? Because I might not believe your conviction. Everyone says, oh, we just have this better future. It's like, okay, I see you're convicted about your better UI versus a competitor. What's the evidence that is going to be 10x better than the next startup? Like, I'll need to see that before I invest. So anyway, I think you go for advisors for all of those elements and help you increase your confidence, conviction, and evidence in the key aspects of your business.
Nice. So we talked about the fact that you came in 1999 and the ecosystem wasn't here. And I loved what you said about a great ecosystem has to have room for and success in the large companies, the mid-size and growth companies, and the startups. And we have that now. I talk about it all the time in my role with ATC that, we no longer are this, college town with a couple of startups, a couple of tech companies and Dell. We have the unicorns, we have the big national, international players who have major offices here. And then we have, we're so well known for all the startups and everything that goes on there, but we've got hundreds of these companies that have 10 to 200 people in them who are out there, plugging along, trying to grow and take themselves to the next level. So as we look to the future now of Austin, where do you think we are today as a community in tech? And where do you think we're going? And maybe what are some of the things we should watch out for?
Well, a big question. You're more qualified to answer because you've got your fingers more in the sand of the tech community. I'm very much more sniper like in my activity. But I think last time we talked, it was like, oh, we used to go to the airport and see people we'd recognize. And now it's unlikely that'll happen.
I haven't seen somebody I know in the airport in like my last 10 trips. You're right. And it used to be 20 years ago, I couldn't go to the airport without seeing 2 or 3 people I knew. So that's a super good analogy.
Yeah. And so when I look at that, when people watch at the airport, I imagine all sorts of different industries, all sorts of different levels of executives, and probably 70% had not lived here 10 years ago, right? That's sort of my view of that. So given that makeup, I'll go back to my previous comment. I think what it is diversity is what's happening. And so you really need to get more targeted when you think about community, when you have such a larger, diverse population and this happens, with forums online and whatever, is like the communities get smaller and more targeted. And so it's not going to be this general text change, and it's like, how do I find my people or what I'm interested in solving for and so it's just going to be more tightly knit, I think, groups of interest that start to form, and you'll find it's often the pitch you get when you do a tour at a large. We just did a University of Washington tour, did a UT tour. And they say you can find your community here. There are so many clubs, there are so many intramural leagues, et cetera, versus you go to a small school of 3,000. And it's like, you will see everyone and know everyone, and you'll see them in your class, and that's your community.
My daughter's graduating class at Dartmouth had like 1,100 or 1,200 people in it. And she literally said, there's probably 40 I've never seen before. Like, I've seen everybody over 4 years with just 1,000 people in the class. She goes, I don't know everybody, but I would recognize anybody in the airport from my class.
Yeah. And you get a sense of community because of that. And so now it just becomes, you have to be more explicit and more targeted, I think, to find that community and build that community, and maybe take a little more initiative. I think intimacy, friendships, trust, community only happens when you have repetitive exposure. And so when the advice I'd give is someone, if they're spreading themselves thin across such a diverse and larger place, they will never get that sense of community mentorship or advice. So they have to narrow the aperture and sort of be okay with, not being in the mix of everything. Yep. Those that feel like they have to join and go to everything you'll never feel that connectedness.
Yeah, well, and I tell everybody, look, you can't just pick one group, but you can't pick 10 groups. You've really got to, depending on your extrovert, introvert level and your other commitments, you got to be in 2 to 4 groups, and you got to go to everything those groups do for a year before people even start to notice you, and before you decide if it's even the right fit. You can't go once and say, this is it, or this isn't it.
Yeah.
So,
but because I think everyone involved, including yourself, there are more distractions. There are clearly more things pulling in multiple ways and more things. I have friends, CEOs who say, I love it when I leave Austin because I can focus in on what I want to focus in on. And someone who's well known or connected here can get pulled so wide that you either have to have extreme discipline and focus and identify those problems you need to solve, or you need to take some time away.
So, Sam, before I let you go, I ask everybody this question, and that is, my belief, sort of my personal motto, is that Community, collaboration, and conversations can solve all problems. If we have more community, more collaboration, more conversations, we're going to win over the long run. Which one of those three words resonates the most with you, and why?
Thinking about that, I think communication, because I don't think community and collaboration can happen without it. So if I think about those ingredients, and if you had more communication with someone, if you had better communication, if you were more clear on what your objectives were, if you were, all those things help drive clarity for yourself, for the other person, for what you're collaborating on, and you build a sense of community if you're communicating often with a person or with a group. And so I think if you were to say, where do I focus my time? I said, I want to invest in this person or this community or whatever. How do I increase the communication? Collaboration and community will come out of that, I believe. And a lot of people just think, just showing up and being there and looking around, I'm going to get, community. It doesn't happen unless people understand, unless you have some vulnerability, unless you're willing to help, unless you're trustworthy. And none of that happens without communication.
Nice. Last question. If someone was coming to visit, maybe someone you grew up with who has never been to Austin before, where would you take them to show off that Austin's cool?
So I go back to my operating system, primary problem to solve. Who are they? What do they want? What are they interested? Are they outdoorsy? Get out on the lake, Mount Bonnell, take them outside of Austin, some things. If they really are a city person, want to get the vibe of the city, we might go have dinner on Rainey Street and go shopping on SoCo, so they get a sense of vibrancy and diversity and sort of like the cool factor kind of thing. But if they have come in with an objective, I need to find a job in this space, or I need to then it might be going out to 5 different cool coffee shops and meeting people that give them a sense of this is, here's the ecosystem and here's where you get help. So it's hard to answer just to anyone general. If I'm just going to have a good time, I think I bring a mix of some of those things to give a diversity of experience, because you have to see, if you see Austin, you have to see the downtown city part. You have to see the walking the trail part and the sort of community part of that, or walking SoCo and the cool part of that, sort of like this is our Melrose Street or whatever, Melrose Avenue, and the food, the different food experiences, et cetera. And then you say, hey, you want to get out of town? Well, within 30 minutes, here's, all the things you can do. And then if they want to live here, if that was the problem, are they Westlake Hills person? Are they East Austin person? Are they a suburb person? So it highly depend. I think more about what experience I want for that person coming out of it and what their objectives are.
Nice answer. Well, Sam, thank you so much for being a guest here on the show. Any last words?
No, I love the vibe of your whole background. I think that well represents the diversity of Austin with all those different shapes. And it's like, they're all like little octagon startups, but they all have now a different shape and a different color. And, it's like that is kind of the main point I was trying to make. I like your background to match that.
Nice. For those listening on audio, my background has all kinds of things going on.
Like a mosaic.
Little mosaic eclectic going on my wall.
Yeah.
So again, Sam, thank you so much for being here. I especially think everybody should go back and listen to when he talked about sort of his own operating system, the GPS, the goals, the problems, the solutions. As Sam was going through the regimen of what that was about, I was thinking about what we're working on with the Austin Technology Council. And I was making notes over in the corner about the goals, the problems, and the solutions, and then finding those right people to help us.
I'll make one other point to see if anyone's listening. If anyone is into adrenaline, one of my companies is a performance driving company called Texas Drift.
I meant to ask about that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the other part when you have some freedom is you go towards like what called intentional congruence, is like I can build a business and have fun and do something with the kids. This was the Texas Drift Academy as I pursued motorsports the last 8 years. But I'm co-owner of Texas Drift Academy, which does drifting and stunt driving about an hour south of Austin. And so if anyone's listening to this that is interested in that, this will be a test. I will give you a special deal if you reach out directly to me on LinkedIn or otherwise. Not really just to drive business, but I'm just curious if we get anyone with a call to action.
And who listens to the 40-minute mark of a podcast? We're going to find out.
Exactly.
That's right. I would reach out to Sam on LinkedIn.
The first person will get a deep discount.
Nice.
First person.
Nice. Yeah. That's going to be me before it even publishes.
Okay.
All right. Well, again, I've said it a couple times. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your friendship. And I've always admired the way you always look at the world 2 steps ahead and then find the right people to guide you. We can all learn from that. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for everybody who tuned in and listened. You know what? If we didn't have an audience, why would we do the show? It's growing, but it's growing slowly. So you need to go tell all your friends in tech that, hey, if you want to learn who's doing cool things in Austin, check out Austin Tech Connect, because we're going to be back every week with interviews with people just as cool as Sam Decker. And I know you're thinking, how will you ever find anyone as cool as Sam Decker? But every single week we seem to do that. And if your company is not supporting the Austin Technology Council, I'm going to encourage you to get involved and help us with our cause. We need the support of the grassroots of Austin. We can't be a grassroots organization if we don't have the grassroots engaged. So make sure that your tech company is supporting ATC. Thank you, and we'll see you next week on Austin Tech Connect.
Thanks for listening to the Austin Tech Connect podcast. Make sure your company is a member of the Austin Technology Council and add your voice to the future of our tech ecosystem in Central Texas.